Good morning, Grandkids. This is your Grandpa Bill. This is video 2 during the coronavirus. Today, I'm going to tell you about some of my early days in northern Wisconsin. My dad, which would be your great grandpa, was actually born in a small town called Elko, Wisconsin, which is about 17 miles south of Rhinelander. We used to go up there all the time in the summer, and we would go up with my three sisters, and he always rented a place on a lake called Enterprise Lake. He grew up in Elko, and about 3 miles from Elko was Enterprise Lake, beautiful lake with an island. And my aunt Patty had a place there, and then my uncle Floyd and Bob had a place there. So we always stayed sort of right in the middle of all that, right on the lake. And that's actually where I learned to water ski. I was 5 years old, and I had taken swim lessons and got a pair of red skis and a ski belt back then. People didn't really wear vests when they were skiing, and a rope. And Grandpa had a 16-foot Starcraft aluminum boat with a 50 horsepower Mercury outboard. And I sat on my Aunt Patty's pier and just sort of stood up and went off and skied halfway around the lake on my first try. So it was a lot of fun. But we spent a lot of time up there. I actually learned to slalom ski up there too. I remember a bunch of my friends, they were called the Johnsons. They lived right by us, and we paddled around with them. And there was a guy named Moose, and his sister's name was Terry. And then there was a guy, and then they had a cousin, and his name was Larry. And they all lived right on the lake. Also, they were actually from Rhinelander, but they spent a lot of time in the summer too. And I knew how to ski real well. And they said, "Well, do you know how to slalom?" And I said, "Sure." So I stood in water. It was maybe about, they told me they'd take off, and I think they pulled me behind their boat my first time. And I stood in water about 6-8 inches deep, and then had my left foot in the binding and just sort of stood up and took off. And that's how I learned how to slalom ski, and had a lot of fun since then. In the summer, we did a lot of different things. We made some shoe skis. We skied on discs and did different things. We learned to barefoot ski, where we had Grandpa's boat, and it went about, I don't know, maybe 35 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour, somewhere in there. And so we'd run it wide open, and we'd be on a slalom ski. And we had the ski loose, the binding for it. And then I'd put my right foot down in the water and slowly just lift it up. And that's how we learned how to barefoot. And so we just did a lot of experimenting, did a lot of fun up there doing those things. And then there was an island on that lake, and I remember we did some sleepovers on the island. And then for boats, everybody, all the young kids back then around the lake had small aluminum boats. The one that we had was 12-foot long, but they were usually either 12 or 14-foot long. And I had a 20-horse motor on it, so it was real quick. It was probably the fastest one. And we, as kids, sort of hung around and drove around the lake in like little posses in those little aluminum boats. They didn't have any steering wheels or anything like that. The motor was just mounted in the back, and you sat in the back seat, usually on a boat cushion. And then you just steer the motor with the little handle that was on it. And we just paddled around, and a lot of times went to the island or went to somebody else's house or whatever we did. But that was a lot of fun. I can remember the woods were just beautiful there. And I can remember Grandpa McCabe taking, well, when I say Grandpa, it'd be your great grandpa, taking walks, because he was from there. It'd be real easy to get lost in those woods, but he sort of knew his way around there. But we'd go back in there, and I can remember some wonderful walks. And then craft cheese, the people that make craft cheese, they had a summer place on the lake, and they owned about half the shoreline on the lake, and it was always undeveloped and pretty. And sometimes we could sort of sneak back in there. Grandpa used to work for them as a little kid. Him and his brothers would sell them different kind of berries and raspberries and things that they would pick and try to make money. So but he didn't really know the people that were there when we would sort of sneak back on that property. And then there was a Boy Scout camp on the other side of the lake. I guess it would be sort of the east side of the lake. So it was a nice sandy shore, and of course, even on our shoreline, it was extremely sandy. So it was a real good boat. And then along that craft shoreline, it had which was off to the left when we left our place, all the way back towards the island. They had boulders that were sort of along there, so it softened the wake. So it was a great place to slalom ski. So Grandma for years would pull us all the way down to the island and turn around, sometimes back around the island and come back, and we would ski along there. And there was lily pads along there, and we'd cut through lily pads and up. So they would fly, so it was sort of fun when we were making sharp cuts. And so it was a lot of great summer memories. Almost most nights there was campfires there. Grandma, which was my mom, really liked the campfires, and so a lot of people would gather around them in the evening, and so you could smell the wood burning, which is a real good smell. And in the summers, in August, they would have what was called the Northern Lights, and it was the most beautiful sky you could ever imagine. So it was really, really pretty place to be. And in 1979, I'm trying to think of the boat that I had. I had a 20-foot checkmate, and that was the first time I took Grandma Bunny up to Wisconsin with me. And so we went up and had that boat, and it had a 225 horse outboard, and then we'd drive that thing wide open all around the lake, and it would just, we'd trim it up, it would just roar. You'd hear the sound going through the woods. So it was really, really pretty neat. And then winters, we would still go up there as kids all the time, and we got a snowmobile. Our first snowmobile ever was a Skidoo. It's called a 640 TNT, and it had straight pipes on it and whatnot, so it was fast, and two big carburetors stuck out the front, and Grandpa liked it. And then we had a Mercury. They made snowmobiles back then, so we had the yellow Sea-Doo and then the black Mercury. So we did a lot of snowmobiling up there in the wintertime. I had a uncle there by the name of Uncle Mick that lived in the town of Elko, and he sort of backed up to a little area that went to a lake that was it was called Otter Lake or Elko Lake or something right there. But anyhow, we would snowmobile a lot of times out of his place in the wintertime, and it was always fun to go in there. They always had nice hot chocolate and things like that for us, and a good place to warm up. I remember one time, Grandpa, the yellow Skidoo blew up, and he made like a little tent out there because he had to rebuild the motor and put new pistons and new jug on it. And it was literally probably 10, 15 below zero out. And he was a trooper. He was out there working on that thing and rebuilt it out there in the cold, and we got it running again. And but it was good old times. They had hundreds of miles of trails. They went all up into the UP of Michigan, and we would do a lot of snowmobiling. And then as over years evolved, I would get faster and newer machines through Rinker. I used to get new snowmobiles every year or two, and your Uncle Mike, and he can probably remember being up there. He had some good snowmobile trips with him, but we had a lot of good times up there. So good memories. Beautiful little town. There was a little restaurant in town called the Clubhouse that my Uncle Floyd ended up buying, but in the early years it was owned by someone else. And Grandma McCabe and I would get up at probably 5:30 in the morning and go into town and eat breakfast. And she used to let me drive the car, and I was probably only maybe 12, 13 years old. But I would drive into town and drive back. There was a guy that was good friends of Grandma and Grandpa called Ding, and his name was Ding Shoe. Last name was like shoe, like you wear on your foot. And he was like a warden or something, and that's where I actually hunted probably one of my earlier times. But I would go with him in his truck, and he'd let me drive his truck. It had on the column, it had a 3-speed shifter, so you'd go down, and second gear was up, and third was down, reverse was forward and up. And so that's I would drive the truck, and we would go down the fire lanes because he was somehow an inspector for him or something. And we kept what was called a 410 shotgun in the back of the truck, and if we saw a partridge out there, which is sort of, they don't have those around here, but it's more like a pheasant and a quail, sort of a combination between a small bird, and they would come out on the fire lanes to eat stone because that's how they were able to digest food. And we would, if we saw one of those, we'd shoot it and take it back and eat it, and they were real good. It was like a quail. It was real good to hunt. So there was deer up there, a lot of deer, and I can remember deer hunting up there. There was, the Johnsons had a hunting shack, so we'd go out that way. So just nothing but good memories up there. So just a little tale of my past. See you later. Bye.